All right. Hello, and everyone. Welcome to another episode of Taking Liberties. Today, well, as you can hear from the tired expression in my voice, I'm just finally getting back from the Australian Libertarian Society Freedman Conference. Unfortunately, I think Lee from Perth didn't make it.
No,
Sorry about that,
unfortunately, I
mate.
didn't. Yeah.
Yep. Tim Willems, who's joining me from Victoria, he
Good to be
was.
back.
Yep, we're both. You'll hear the, I guess you could say, exhaustion in our voice. Uh, we apologize for that, but it really was just that exhausting. Freedom can. I hate to say this, but you can only take so much freedom in one weekend.
A lot of
Anyway,
people didn't make it through the entire weekend.
I know, and to take the piss out of Tim Andrews and John Humphreys, it really was the best lineup ever.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's not familiar with it, the emails that we all were getting prior to the event was basically, "This is the best lineup ever. Please sign up." So it's become a bit of a joke. I
It's all right.
digress.
It'll be the best lineup next year. So it's become an ongoing thing of every year's the best year lineup.
Well, yes, I
Uh,
mean, hopefully it is.
there were little things that I have, improvements that I enjoyed. The fact that there was more flashy banners. They had the official Freedman Conference banner, and the Libertarian Society got their own banner, and they had the stalls there on the Saturday. So I like all those little things. So that those things got a
Yes,
big thing from me.
it's definitely become a little bit more professional,
Mm.
and the movement of people in and out was slightly better than before. Previously, it was like herding cats. So this
Mm.
time, much better. I was a little bit disappointed that the left didn't give us our promised protest. I would have loved to
Mm.
see a protest against, basically voluntarism, which would have been amazing to watch. However, I pause and digress. I believe we were going to talk about why states are racist and xenophobic. The state
I,
itself as a
yeah.
as a mechanism. I sort of want to kick this off by saying, let's actually this is something I've said before, and people go, well, you're starting to think of the state as a person, and yes, I kind of am, but at the same time, if you knew a person that said, hey, all of this is my territory, and fuck off if you go anywhere near it, you would be right to say that that person's a bit of a dick,
Yeah.
right? And you'd probably not want to hang around them. Well, they've made it clear that they don't want to hang around you. Modern states are kind of like that, for a multitude of reasons, but they're kind of like that, and want to kick that off by talking about the latest changes to foreign investment that the Abbott government was going after, where they want to jail potential foreign home buyers for skirting our foreign investment schemes. Uh, I'll kick it off to you guys, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So I mean, the, I guess the okay. So the whole thing is basically there's restrictions on foreigners buying homes. It's usually they have to buy new homes, and all of a sudden the government has decided it's going to have a big crackdown. It's going to charge foreigners more to buy properties here, and they're going to be very punitive towards anybody who has bought an existing property. And I mean, it's probably no shock for those of us on this podcast to say it, the Liberals are becoming more like the Labor Party, but in this regard, they really are. I mean, theoretically, the Labor Party historically, with its connection to the unions, has been pretty protectionist and all the rest of it. Though, to Whitlam's credit, he was the one who abolished a lot of the tariffs. But a lot around the unions, there's a lot of protectionism, and the Liberal Party is supposed to be about free markets, and well, this is a very anti-free market kind of response, and it's really like it's populist in a bad way. Like it's really kind of ugly, kind of this whole rhetoric of foreigners are driving up the price of homes, therefore let's go after them foreigners.
Can I just can I just jump in there and say, you know, we have roughly 7 million square kilometers of land
Yeah.
in this country. Um, why is the government trying to tell me there's a shortage of land?
Yeah, well,
Well, there's
I
a
mean,
shortage of land which you can build on. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, everyone was freaking out about urban sprawl, but that's what we're lacking now. The outer suburbs can't expand, and also NIMBYism in the inner city is preventing high rises from being built. So
So
it's not
I
a,
actually,
I mean,
yeah.
it's just straight up nonsense to say that there's not enough land. Like I've seen a picture that sort of showed you, like if you fit everybody in the world into a city the size of Paris, it would basically fill about half of New South Wales. So if you can fit 7 billion people into half of New South Wales, to say that this country has a problem with land availability, or with lack of land, is just absolute rubbish, absolute total rubbish.
And I actually want to say, this is maybe my engineering training just coming a little bit too much into it. It's bullshit to say that there's land that you can't build on, right? Because what is it that you're actually saying when we can't build here? You're saying that you're saying that the absolute possibility of delivering services does not exist, right? And here's the thing. I don't think that's true I think that's not true for about 80% of Australia, right? I think there are chunks where that's absolutely true.
I'll explain myself better. When I say there's land you can't build on, it's not because it's not appropriate land. It's because the government says you can't. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all right, all right. You know what? Okay, that makes much more sense, and I agree with you. Yeah, okay. So, but I was saying, right, so I'm coming at this from a perspective of, it's not the case that there's not enough land to build on. It's possibly the case that there might be land that is too prohibitively expensive to build on. However, the thing is, that's already sort of incorporated into the land price, right? So, for example, if it's prohibitively expensive to build on some land, that land is going to be dirt cheap, right? Because it's standard economics. They're complementary goods, right?
Yeah.
So like cheap land, expensive housing, expensive land, cheap housing. That's just the way. That's just how the way trade-offs are going to work. Now, to that extent, I think a lot of the very cheap land has already been taken up, and the argument is being presented for some silly reason that we should restrict it to just those cheap areas of land as where development has happened and just stop development everywhere else. Now, that, of course, has the unfortunate effect of locking a lot of poor people out of the housing market. This is really the lefty NIMBYism that's there, in the country. This is where they really fail the poor, and I don't think it gets called out enough.
I mean, I think the reason this whole thing is coming up is essentially the other government's desperately trying to find something to justify its existence. People don't like, this is an ongoing thing of trying to hit on poor people, to hit on foreigners for investing in this country, and it's just, there's not much the federal government can do regarding land availability. Like, it's really
yes,
a state issue.
They can release land. They can absolutely do something.
Yes, but I mean, look, planning regulations are mainly at a state level and at a local level. So I mean, yes, obviously land releases are a big thing, but even in terms of existing land usage, that's probably even a bigger thing, because lots of Australian cities are going to be, very, homes on big blocks, and you don't probably even need to release that much more land to even, in my view, markedly reduce the cost of land. So it's one of those things that, even if you take out the Fed, if you just looking at the Fed's ability to do anything in this area, it's mainly the states. The other government needs a reason to exist, and so they're picking up something popular, because they just can't. They have no other justification for anything else they're doing. It's just they want to win the next election. They made the token attempt to try and reduce the size of government. So let's just find what's popular and go for that.
Well, it's the old thing. Whenever there's social economic problems, blame foreigners. It's easy.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, okay, I might be spitballing here to the point where Sinclair Davidson, who gave this massive speech on the explanation of how GST calculations work, might go, that's a stupid idea. That's a stupid idea, and you're encouraging really bad incentives. But the federal government is in charge of distributing GST money back to the states. Theoretically, if you had a value in there to calculate the amount of development that was going on in the state, and very negatively, say for example, if states were levied a certain component of their GST revenue for not releasing land, right? If you started holding back on their GST money for denying development, maybe the federal government could change the incentives for states to actually focus on development.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great idea, just because I don't think the federal government is that responsible to keep it at that. Like once you open the door to them putting all these caveats on how, GST, like the more caveats you put in there, the more they're likely to use that as a stick to try and beat the states. And they've already got enough of those sticks, like between the whole.
Yeah, I was going to say there's already controls on education, health, and policing. So, but interestingly enough, if you take a look at what effect that's had, it's actually reduced competition amongst the states. And it's not because the controls that are put in are there to beat the states, into behaving in a certain way. It's basically there because if you are a state that performs well, you're beaten into submission, right? With denying you GST revenue, essentially.
Yeah, the only real, that's the whole GST thing's a mess. it's the. And I don't just say there's a Western Australian, of course, we have a thing against Canberra, and there's the whole GST thing. And I think previously I've explained my particular views on the Barnett government's. Saying it's yeah.
So succeed.
Well, I don't know if Colin Barnett would be at that great a PM. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if secession is like a solution, but nevertheless, it's there's only so much. Essentially the only reason they're talking about this is because they're looking for something to do. They're bored. There's always like they're bored. They're hunting around, and nothing they've suggested is going to help at all. If anything, it's going to make it. It's just going to. It's going to punish those who actually have built homes that people want. Essentially it's subsidizing local home buyers at the expense of foreign. At the expense of the extra home owners themselves, because they could sell their homes to cashed-up foreigners, but they lose that profit because there's all of a sudden there's less demand to sell to a local buyer. So it's and of course. All this stuff, all these rules that they're looking to change, and taxes they're looking to add. Of course, the taxes are just hunting for more revenue to prop up their terrible budget situation, which is entirely of their own making. As much as they like to blame the Senate, it is their fault. It's just. Oh, what was I going to say? They've got all these taxes and stuff. Oh, that's right. It's just making investment in this country less likely because foreigners are going to think, well, at any given time, even under the Liberals, they might decide to change their rules, change their mind, and all of a sudden we're being kicked out of our property. So why would you invest in Australia where you can invest anywhere else in the world?
I think another reason for the decline in land release is the fact that we had state Labor governments for about 10 years in Australia, which during that time they were affected by the green ideology, which said you must not build on any more pieces of land. It must be kept in its environmental condition. So that's another cause of it.
The Greens call it steady state growth.
Yeah, which is really good for a bunch of rich people, inner city people, to say about poor people trying to buy their first home. So yeah, good on them.
It's the same reason they made us all build desal plants instead of dams. It's the fact that nothing about nature can be touched, but we're seeing the result now.
Yeah, it's not just that, but here's the thing: they talk about income inequality, right? And I remember there was some research that that looked at Piketty's research on growing income inequality in the world, and someone noticed, hang on, the biggest thing driving up inequality everywhere in the world is housing.
Yeah.
Right? And universally, inequality was the worst in areas which have high housing control things, and places like Paris, places like London, places like New York, places with the biggest sort of public housing systems with massive planning laws and all of that stuff, right? They're the ones which had some of the worst inequality. And like to normal people, obviously it makes perfect sense, right? If you can't find a house, I mean, housing, clothing, shelter, clothing, food. These are like the three on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's like at the very top before you start filtering down to all that other crap, right? And if you're purposefully raising the price of one of those things, shelter, right, you are going to entrench people as a permanent underclass. And this is, I guess, what I'm trying to say is a range of very government-led policies have led to income inequality in the scales that have seldom existed since, the years of serfdom.
Mm.
And
I guess I was going to say, go Tim.
Yeah, this is what the Liberals could. What we're talking about now is the arguments that the Liberals could put forward about this is why there is this crisis, and deregulation and land release is the solution. But as we've found, they can't be bothered doing any policy reform.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, I guess like this sort of leads into that second sort of topic of bad, like, theoretically well-intentioned ideas. We want to try and make sure poor people have housing, so let's put in all these regulations. Another aspect of regulating the lives of poor people is immigration, which is kind of our second topic for tonight, which is, you've got this situation where, poor people in other countries want to come to Australia either to work and then go back, or to work and potentially stay. And we have all these barriers to stop them. So if you're an engineer, or if you're a doctor, or whatever, hey, relatively easy for you to come into the country, but if you're poor and unskilled, you can't. Well, that leads us to what we talked about. So David Leyonhjelm, the LDP senator, has put up the suggestion that if you pay 50 grand, you can get a visa. Anybody who has that sort of money can get a visa. So, which I think is a much better solution than the current one, which the left puts forward, which is essentially restricting immigration because reasons. There's a variety of reasons. All of them are terrible.
Because the hordes at the Pilbara, man.
Yeah, that's it.
The hordes at the Pilbara.
Well, I mean, you kind of got like almost two strands of thought in the left on this. So you've kind of got the traditional unionist kind of thought, which is essentially we don't want poor workers to price Australian workers out of the labour market. Not that they really seem to understand how introducing more workers creates more demand for products and services, which then create more jobs. But then you've also kind of got this, I don't know, like you kind of got the green left, this almost, they sort of don't want them to come here and become rich consumers. Like the worst thing in the world is to make poor people rich, because then rich people will consume all these goods and services and, climate change and overpopulation and the rest of it.
I think the best representation of that mindset is that Labor and the Greens, they don't want foreigners to come over here and work, but they want asylum seekers to come in, and they ban them from working. So we like foreigners, but
I was going to get to that, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that actually highlights what I think for me, like in terms of conservative rhetoric, because I guess I view myself as a conservative libertarian, like guys like Andrew Bolt and all those guys, they say, oh, look at all these migrants, they come to the country, they go to the UK or they go to Sweden or wherever, and they end up hating everybody, and they get turned into extremists and all this sort of stuff. But if you actually look at how all these systems work, a lot of it revolves around migrants who can go to a country and then they're not forced to work. They essentially get welfare. And then, like all forms of welfare, it's really easy to hate everybody else around you if you get money from this god, from like a cargo cop, like from the god in the sky, money pours down from heaven into your bank account. Where if you look at countries which have, allow migration, but they have to work, you actually
get
the
United States.
Like the United States, and traditionally like Australia, you don't get that sort of disharmony. I mean, you still have issues, but it's not anywhere near the same, because if I have to buy my milk and bread from the whitey down the road, or if I have to, buy work, like have my car serviced by the dark skinned guy down the road, it's much harder to hate each other because you're dependent on each other. So I guess this kind of also touches on issues of, well, this proposal by David Leyonhjelm, you come to the country to work if you pay your 50 grand, which I think is too much. I think if it was 20 or 10, it'd be better, but whatever, that's just details. But I think that sort of approach says, well, you can come and work, and then, okay, yeah, there'll be multicultural kind of going on, because people come here. If you're from Afghanistan, you'll live with Afghanis, but at least you're sort of cooperating voluntarily with other people, as opposed to this welfare system that draws people in and basically creates the circumstances on which it's very easy to not integrate in any way and to sort of end up actually resenting everybody else.
Well, actually, you make a good point, and Milton Friedman sort of made a similar argument. He said, like, why would you say capitalism is racist? And he pulled out like a pen, right?
Yeah.
And he said, look at this pen, right? The rubber in this pen is made in Brazil, right? And he said, like, it was a French pen, but basically he goes like, the rubber's made in Brazil, the ink is made in Italy, all of this other stuff, and he goes like, there are so many people that came together to make this pen, right? How can that possibly be racist?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, right? Voluntary trade is like one of the biggest things that sort of gets around a lot of these issues that people constantly talk about, right? Like the conservatives talk about integration, right? What is more integral to society than trade, right? You cannot possibly have everything. You need to engage in trade in order to get the stuff you want.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, even in terms of the interior, like the internal workings of a country, like if you divided up all of Australia into essentially city-states, and large regions.
Which I would love to do.
But if you created a protectionist regime amongst all of them. So essentially, one of the great things about the Australian and the US Constitution is that it essentially creates a sort of a free trade zone. And so over time, essentially, you don't have these regional conflicts because, if like protectionism isn't just restricted to this country and other countries. You go back enough in time and you go to places like England and France and you'll have protectionism even between regions. But of course, when you actually develop a system of trade within a country, within a geographical area, those regional kind of rivalries and conflicts essentially break down because essentially free trade unites everybody. So it's not like my town of Busselton is at war with the other town of Bunbury because we produce this and they produce that and we want to produce, blah blah blah.
Isn't there a war going on between? Isn't there a war going on between Eton and Bunbury?
Well, sort of. They got 24-hour shops in Eton and they don't have it in Bunbury, so I think it's just jealousy on Bunbury's part. But it's one of those things that, like even in Australia, you say, well, if we didn't have essentially this free trade zone, you would have protectionist rhetoric between Western Australia and the other states, and that would create essentially the same sort of dynamic that protection between Australia and other countries do. So it's one of those things you just need to look at the history of countries where they've essentially created these free trade zones. You say, well, free trade ends divisions. Free trade creates harmony and unity and togetherness.
I'll play devil's advocate here. People would say, well, European Union is a free trade zone and it's not working out too well. But what you also, what our reply is the fact that there's also welfareism in a lot of the European Union, which breeds these social problems. So yes, free trade is one element, but also not having a welfare state is the other aspect.
And also, I mean, the massive regulation from Brussels, like essentially Brussels has become this hub of, ultra regulation of everything. And if you look at the regulations that Brussels does, it's just insane. Like, you can't say, like, all the stuff, like, even stuff the labeling of a bottle of water, like, water doesn't rehydrate you and stuff like this. It's, so that's sort of that tears away at that free trade aspect. But sorry, because you were about to say something.
Oh, I was going to say, I wouldn't really refer to the EU as a free trade zone. Yeah. I'm just like, it's more like a little club that doesn't behave in a particularly democratic way. Sorry, it behaves in a particular autocratic way to rule over a bunch of states that were democracies that are, for some reason, trying to get rid of it. I don't know. I couldn't, for the life of me, I can't understand what the purpose of the EU is to all of the states. I don't see what they're actually offering the member states.
Cushy jobs in Brussels once their political careers in their home countries are done.
Yeah, because like so. Uh, sorry, this is me. I'm about to like go on a little bit of a rant against the EU. So here's my understanding of what they wanted. They wanted a federalized system similar to what the US has, but for some reason that Brussels authority that they've created is, firstly, it's no way resembling anything that a federal system looks like, right? Like we have like bicameral legislation. We have all these checks and balances set in place to sort of prevent a complete takeover from the federal of all the states. I mean, it takes a long time to get to what we've gotten to. And for some reason, they decided that they wanted to speed up the process by basically creating a regulatory federalism, um, which to me just doesn't make sense. Because the only way you could possibly sell that to all of the, you know, all of the sovereign states that make up that potential place is to say, we're going to take away your sovereignty, and that's that.
There always seems to be, I guess, this referring to the federalism debate that we had at the ALS conference, is the fact that it seems that in federations over time, the fact that the central government always acquires more and more power, which is true of Australia, which is true of the United States, which is also true of the EU as well. The fact that the central government always acquires more power, which is the reason why you can't call the EU a free trade zone if it has an unlimited government in Brussels.
Mm. And I mean, we're getting a little bit sidetracked here, but also, I mean, there's a big difference between Australia and the US, which I guess, relatively homogenous in terms of, I mean, it is an immigrant nation, but essentially you've kind of got a bunch of states or colonies forming together who are relatively similar to begin with, where the European Union, you've got Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, UK, Sweden, Finland, like you've got this Greece, Romania, like you get this very, very wide group. So even though they may have started off as sort of some sort of federal system, like you've got a whole bunch of things that are going to try and put pressure to change that in a variety of ways. So
I'll tie this.
To get back to the topic of immigration and
I'll tie this sidetrack part of the show up, that the fact that when we talk about things such as free immigration and free trade, we have to point out that no, the European Union is not a free trade and free trade zone.
Okay, but sorry. So in that case, I'll actually get us back to topic. Anyway, so basically, the immigration. So basically, Tony Abbott just knocked this proposal back, despite the fact that it was supported by the Productivity Commission and its LDP policy. And quite frankly, economically, it makes more sense, right? Like, for example, there is nothing that would kill the people smuggling trade faster than undercutting their price.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's called the government crowd-out effect for a reason.
And Brian Kaplan suggested a similar sort of thing, because he's a big proponent of open borders, and he's talked about this whole concept as a compromise. You don't like the best policy is actually, it is pretty much open borders. Like, you want to have as much movement of people as possible because of all the benefits that bring, but you got to kind of pay off the protectionists and the nativists. So this, at least this way, kind of gives this. I mean, I think there is some validity in a low price. You don't want to, yeah. But basically, it allows you to essentially pay off the special interests that, or at least give you political cover.
So yeah.
Possible. So,
but what I was going to say
is money on the table.
I've seen conservative estimates say that GDP conservative estimates put like doubling of the GDP by open immigration. It's basically
world GDP.
No, doubling of world GDP, but apparently the effect on the rich nations would be far more significant than the effect on the poor nations. And to me, it just seems like a bit of a no-brainer if you were really interested like as a people in improving everyone's lot in life. It's just a policy you would go for, and especially if you're an environmentalist. Because if you're an environmentalist, what you're saying is effectively, hey, look, everybody will coalesce to a place they like, right? And they will live there, and the rest of the world doesn't need to be affected by people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's the benefit. I mean, ultimately, also the ideas. So one of the biggest benefits of more immigration, is like ideas. Like if you want to have the next, if you want to find the person who's going to invent the solar cell that actually replaces coal-fired power, or if you want to have the person who comes up with the idea that revolutionizes how you deliver this or that service, like you need them to live in countries where they can actually. You need people to live in countries where they can actually, make the most of those opportunities that they have, and so.
Can't we just clone Elon Musk?
Yeah. I mean, I think
free immigration only works with a free economy and a limited government. Otherwise, if government interferes in a lot of aspects in society, that's when the various social groups start to clash.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's lots of like even beyond just a straight up economic argument. I think the ideas argument. I think that's something that libertarians could do more to sell, because I think if you say, well, in any given percentage of population, you're going to have a 0.1% chance you'll get a genius, you'll get the next Mozart, or you'll get an Elon Musk, or you'll get a whoever, or a Don Bradman. Well, if we double the population, you can have that 0.1% chance is much larger group. So yeah.
It reminds me of a case, was it 10 years ago, some Commonwealth Games athletes from Africa, they ran away from the Olympic Commonwealth Games village to try and seek asylum in Australia, and because they were all skilled athletes, government said, oh, yep, sure, you can stay here.
Well,
so if we do it first.
With that, I guess we will end the show, because I just looked at the time and went, wow, I'm severely over. So next week is budget. So we'll obviously have a budget-oriented show.
It'll be the best budget ever.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical than that. And
I think we all get a show bag from the government, which has got all these nice goodies in it,
Except none of us have children, so I suspect we're the ones who will be paying for the show bags for everybody else.
So basically what you're saying is it's a it's an auction on stolen property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Auction.
All right, guys. So let's call it a night at that, and see everyone next week.